Hello, and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas into what it means to live as a follower of Jesus in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. This is Lauren Richmond Jr. Today I'm joined by Freda G. Sampson. Freda is an advocate for equity, justice, and radical inclusion. She is an entrepreneur, creative, and author. Her passion stems from growing up and observing her father, Reverend Dr. Frederick G. Sampson II, a civil rights leader and pastor, fight for equality for all people. Witnessing that love in action has formed the direction of her personal and professional journey. A diversity and inclusion professional, Freda provides consulting, training, and facilitation services to corporations, governmental agencies, and organizations throughout Michigan and Canada on diversity, inclusion, and cultural competency. All right, welcome to the show, Freda Sampson. Thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you?
So thank you for the invitation. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you today, Lauren, and to have what I hope is going to be a robust and meaningful conversation and exchange. I would say, in addition to kind of the synopsis that is articulated in my bio, I would want you to know that I am the granddaughter and the daughter, the sister and the niece, the cousin and friend of preachers and theologians, of academic leadership that represents the vast array of kind of the divinity expression. I personally am not a preacher, but I will say unequivocally that I am a great lover and supporter of the Black church as an institution and as a vehicle for my faith journey. And because of that, I can also be that hopefully important voice of reason and a critic when I think we have an opportunity to do and be better.
Well, that's all. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm already intrigued and looking forward to our conversation all the more. You mentioned just hearing what you shared, and then I think if I remember correctly, reading from your section in the book, talking about growing up as a preacher's kid. Is that correct? Share,
Yes.
if you would, about your faith background and what that looks like today.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, it has indeed been a journey. As a preacher's kid, and I'm a member of a finite club of human beings walking the earth as PKs. Our experiences, particularly within the formal tradition of church, is different. It's a different experience in so many ways, from how we are perceived as individuals in that larger church narrative to how we are extensions to our father or our mother, who are the leaders or the pastors in the churches. And so that has come with its own opportunities and its own joys, and additionally its own weight. And the breadth and depth of what is required when you are that preacher's child. The expectation is high. And if I were to just be honest, the tolerance for grace can sometimes be low.
Yeah.
Right. And so that makes for a really interesting dynamic and creates, for me, speaking first person singular, created for me a particular resilience, as well as kind of that's where my early critique of kind of the formality of the church really is seated. And so, as it were, as I grew up, church for me, the Christian journey, expressed through the dynamism of church, was really much more formal, right? It was you do A, B, and C. You worship in this way. You express yourself in this way, and you operationalize your faith. I operationalize my faith within the framework of tradition, right? that these are the things as I know them to be. I understand now that formality was also informed to a degree by the early development of my relationship with God. Right. And so when I look at my present experience or expression, in contrast to who I was and to who I am, and certainly who I will potentially continue to become, it's far more relational, right? It's not about reading the hymn in the correct way or memorizing the scripture verse by verse. It is about the relationship I have with God. And now, with some years under my belt and some opportunity to have some lived experience, my relationship is really the place where I seek my Christian journey, my spiritual journey. So those are kind of that's some of it, and obviously there's so much more. But those are some of the nuances between early and present.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, especially your perspectives growing up as a preacher's kid. I went to Bible college where there's many students whose, in my case, fathers were pastors. It was a conservative Bible college, and it was always tragic and sad in a way to see the students whose faith, was so disillusioned. Not so much perhaps their faith, but just their kind of disillusionment in the church, because they've seen how the sausage gets made, so to speak. They'd seen, their parents be mistreated. I guess I'm grateful for you that I imagine that's somewhat probably true in your case too. I'm grateful that you've found a place still in church.
Yeah, well, you are spot on. It is you do get to see how the sausage gets made, and sometimes you can't unsee what you've seen. Right?
Yeah,
and that's what makes it, as I say, kind of tongue to cheek, such a particular club, because it's not just one or two things around this journey. As a preacher's kid in my own spiritual walk, but it's layered like an onion with so many dimensions that absolutely, to your point, Lauren, could have a profound impact on a person's personal journey, having had those experiences. And I like to live in a space of full transparency whenever I feel it's safe to do so. And so to that extent, there were certainly moments, particularly in college and then at later points in my life, where I grappled with the church, right? With the formality and the expectation and the rigid, sometimes, not always, traditionalism that exists within that framework. And it was a struggle, because the contrast to that was I also was still a preacher's kid.
Yeah.
And so despite what that personal piece was, there's still the importance of showing up in a way that is an extension to, in my case, my father's ministry, as much as I possibly could.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Appreciate you sharing that story. I'm just thinking again, like, I've technically am a pastor's kid. My kids are pastor's kids. And for me, it's such a challenge to think about, the ways that, my testimony, my actions in the world really will influence them. And I feel like there's added, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but more awareness perhaps of, am I making sure that my kids are seeing not just like faith lived out for me, but also in their church context.
And I think to be able to talk about that and to share that with others could have a really important effect on perhaps young people who are navigating the spaces, who might not hear that particular testimony, to understand that what they might be grappling with is indeed real. the other piece to this, of course, is the invisibility of it.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's not spoken about, and
Mm-hmm.
because, in many ways we are seen and unseen simultaneously, can really position you to think, well, now, is this me, or are other people having experiences such as this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is a great conversation already. Perhaps let me ask you a question and frame it in this in our conversation. What do you think has been a spiritual practice or devotional or some kind of faith forming thing that's kept you in the church with all the things and challenges we've talked about already here?
So, a couple of things. One, it is in part how I define church. Right? And for me, as I have grown and matured in my faith, I see in a very real way that church certainly extends well beyond the walls of any physical building.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, the expression of church is animated through community and engagement in ways that really is illuminated by what we saw Jesus do. Right? It is to not be confined to the restrictiveness of walls. And so, because I define church and see church in that way, my ability to stay in it is different. But I will say this: if there were a particular practice or behavior that I experience, or animate, I progress through life with, it is, in these days, I have learned the deep importance of being in conversation with God all the time, right? And so it is, for me, not the formality of a particular prayer at a particular time, and that is fine. And I'm not suggesting that it's not.
Sure.
For me, it is being in conversation with God all day. And what has helped me, what has impacted me, is that when I stay in conversation with God, I am better able to not engage in conversations, fodder that can lead me to shift my thinking and shift my gaze, right? Mm-hmm. And so just staying focused on God. And I'm not suggesting that it's easy, because sometimes we get caught up in the moment, right? Mm-hmm. We get caught up in a situation or a circumstance that makes it very easy to turn right or left. And so, no, by no stretch do I always get it right. But when I find that I'm able to either recenter and focus on God and be in conversation, or stay centered and focus on God and be in conversation, I do better.
Yeah. Well, this is great. Thank you for sharing that. So let's jump in. I had Freda on to talk about, she's editor of a new book, 100 Questions and Answers about the Black Church, the Social and Spiritual Movement of a People. So if you would talk about kind of the idea, formation, kind of what brought the book about.
So a friend of mine, a dear friend by the name of Joe Grimm, someone who I've known for many years, who is a professor of journalism at Michigan State University. When we first encountered each other, I knew of the work that he was doing around this 100 Questions and Answers series. Immediately intrigued by the work that he was doing, we had an opportunity to engage over the years to really just talk about what are the elements that people are curious about, right? What are the faith traditions or the identities that people want to have some awareness of, but don't know how to ask the questions? And so I supported him on a book, because this is a series, and it talks about the multitude of both identities and faith traditions. So I worked with him many years ago. I believe it was around 2015, on as a contributor for the 100 Questions and Answers on African Americans, where there was a delving into of just what are our cultural distinctions that people may want to have a better understanding of, not to put on display, but to be able to participate in a more culturally competent way
Mm-hmm.
in conversations that can help create really authentic ones. And so we had been going back and forth over the years talking about what would be that next project. PBS did a special led by Dr. Henry Louis Gates on the Black church. There was a lot of energy and excitement around that special. And so that reenacted some conversation that Joe Grimm and I were having. And we just both agreed a book around the Black church is so important because we talk about faith traditions, but how do those cultural frameworks inform that faith journey? And the Black church is certainly an institution that is steeped in both faith and in culture.
Yeah, that's helpful. Perhaps it'd be helpful to start with when you talk about the Black church as an institution, perhaps talk about kind of the history and formation in America, at least.
So that's a huge question, right?
Mm-hmm.
and I am not a historian, and I do not play one on television, so I will not be able to give you the full depth and breadth by any stretch. But I will say this: that when you contextualize it from historical perspective, the first question for me that comes to mind is, why was there a need?
Mm-hmm.
Why was there a need to have an institution that was centered around the Black cultural experience? And in some ways, I think the question is easily answered because in this country, we know that we are seated in a space where racism and discrimination and colonialism was very much a part of our narrative and is very much a part of our narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in those early days when African Americans, Black people were able to engage in any kind of tradition of faith, it was under the guise of an overseer, or it was limited by the inability to express yourself in a safe way. And it was seated in profound restriction, rigidity, and racism. The Black church became a fundamental necessity because of the second classness that Black human beings were forced to adhere to in white institutional churches, being relegated to the back of the church, having to sit in the balcony, being required to stay outside, being limited in the ability to have even access to the word in an authentic way, in a complete way.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, in the sheer expression of who we are as a people, understanding that some of our traditions and some of our expressions did not start the day that we arrived on these grounds, right? But there is that African ancestral expression that we brought with us along the waters, and that continues to be part of who we are today. We needed our own space, to be able to articulate our expression and our belief in our way, heard and led and spoken by us.
Yeah. Now, what are the, as I understand it, there's 7, am I remembering it correctly, historically Black churches historically? And what are those denominations?
Yeah. So if you kind of go with the earliest, it's the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is also referred to as the AME.
Yeah.
It's the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, or AMEZ. It's the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, CME. It is Church of God in Christ. We often refer to as COGIC.
Yeah.
And the Baptist tradition, which is inclusive of the National Baptist Convention of America, the National Baptist Convention USA, and the Progressive National Baptist Convention.
Okay. Now, something that was interesting in the book that I thought was helpful is you make a distinction, or you kind of delineate that not all majority African American churches are Black churches. Can you share more about that?
So the distinction, African American or Black, is also a descriptor, right? It describes. And so it depends upon how you look at it. If you are referring to the church because the membership is Black, then you can certainly say that churches that have Black memberships are Black churches. But when you expand beyond the descriptor and then delve into the cultural narrative and the historical importance of the Black church, there may be some difference in terms of how those churches perceive themselves, right? So the nuances in how you're framing and asking the question.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. One of the things that stood out to me from the book is that social mission is really important in Black churches and distinguishes them from other Protestant churches. Share more about that if you can, and then I want to ask you about some specific examples here.
Sure. The social mission, or the social justice, the social gospel. We can speak about it in all of those frameworks. Is what one of the reasons that the Black church is such an important institution in the Black community. And by that, I mean this, where access was not provided, was not allowed, was not negotiated, or even an opportunity around education, around employment, around housing, around healthcare, where there was fundamentally the reduction of our humanity to being 3/5 of a person. We did not have all the tools that are available to our kind of human experience to live out our best lives in that way. And so the church became that important instrument that helped make available ways to educate our children and support systems to make sure our children were able to learn, to be able to make connections for employment, to be able to provide the services, the social services in the community around healthcare and around tutoring, around the economic disparity that has been so profoundly exercised and continues to be significantly, and that's an understatement, an impact on even where we are currently from a wealth perspective, right? And so the church has been that institution that has simply, I won't say connected the dots, but filled in on those deeply creviced gaps of need, and has done so consistently through the generations in ways that has informed people's ability to be able to experience their hopes and dreams for tomorrow.
Yeah. So I want to highlight a couple aspects of that, and I'm curious if I can hear your thoughts. So the Black social gospel, Black liberation theology, and LGBTQ plus. You in the book you discuss those. The book discusses those. Share, if you would, kind of maybe perhaps give a general sense of those. For example.
So yes, I will, but I also want to be really clear. My responsibility for this book was as an editor,
sure,
and I want to make sure that the students who worked so hard to help bring this book to fruition are acknowledged as such, because there was a team of young people who really rolled up their sleeves to make this book even possible. And so having said that, when we think about Black social gospel, when we think about Black liberation theology, let me just stay in those two lanes for just a second.
Yes.
So the Black social gospel is indeed that preached word that is inclusive of who we are, right? It is that expression through by which we both speak, but we also act in a way that is reflective of the gospel of Jesus Christ through the lens of our social responsibility to feed the poor, to lift those in need, to be a voice of love and of justice, right? And so much is encompassed in that capacity, right? But then when you look at it in the context of Black liberation theology, which was led so profoundly by Dr. James Cone in terms of really constructing a language and a narrative and a critique and a theological kind of clarity and understanding of what that is. It is knowing that when I see God, I see me, because I'm a reflection of God. And so when I see God, I see a Black woman, right? And so it is that the liberation is that when we see our faith as a part of our experience, and I'm doing Dr. Cone no justice, not a theologian, but to the takeaway that I have is that when we look at Black liberation theology, it is indeed to liberate both our spirit and our mind, our soul and our heart, around understanding that the theology that expresses who we are and our value and importance and contribution to God's complete picture is inclusive of who we are. And it is not an external thought. And so what we have to know for sure is that in our theology, we must see us. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
You also made reference to the LGBTQIA plus. And so, I guess what I'd like to know is if you give me a little bit more in terms of what it is. Do you want to know the Black church's kind of historical perspective around this? What's your question?
Yeah, in the book, if I remember correctly, in the book kind of just discussed how that's, that the thoughts and concepts around that topic have been morphing and shifting through the years. So I'm just curious how you see that playing out, perhaps yourself and perhaps historically.
Yeah. Well, okay. Thank you for that clarification. And you're absolutely right. It has and continues to morph in terms of both understanding and acceptance, right? And so where I don't necessarily think that the Black church is a departure from a lot of religious institutions, there has been an evolution of awareness and ability to be more inclusive of all identities, and particularly the identity that seats within the LGBTQA community. And so while there has been this notion of don't ask, don't tell, because if we're going to be honest, all identities have been represented within the Black church and within churches since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
But the degree by which we see them, that we acknowledge and that we receive them in their holistic expression has shifted and continues to shift. And so that idea of we know or we assume or we believe or we think, but as long as you don't talk about it, we're okay, perhaps was where we were in this conversation, but where we are in this present moment, and certainly where we are moving towards, is that the nature of seeing people and loving people and holding people for who they are in their identity is going to, in so many ways, be the distinct difference between churches that I believe will be here long into the future and those who will be seen as less relevant. It is important. It is imperative, in my opinion, that we that we as a Black church, and this is one of the areas where I do have a significant critique, because the identities of women, the identities of those in the community of the LGBTQIA, have not been fully embraced in a way that I believe is important and is imperative. So this is where our opportunity is. And we are evolving many of our churches, not all, because Black churches, we can be very conservative. As African-American people, Black people, we are literally more on the conservative end than people might imagine. But I do believe that that we are opening, expanding, and building our understanding, our awareness, in our ability to meet people and see people for who they are.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing those perspectives. I think that's really helpful for churches, regardless of where they come from and their cultural context. Something else that stood out to me in the book here, and I'm going to read, this is, I think, a quote here. Studies show Black Americans would rather rely on God than a religious leader to guide them. So I'm curious, do you think Black church has done a better job at helping people develop a personal, intentional faith?
I think that's a great question. Thank you for that. I think the Black church has done a very good job in guiding people, Black people, with the inevitability of that. Right? So that relying on God, that Pew study that talks about this very thing and this idea that we rather rely on God rather than a religious leader. I think if you unpack the history of Black people in this country, for me, it almost seems like, if you will, Lauren, just roll with me on this,
Sure.
a no-brainer, right? It just seems like out of the many things to think about, that that perhaps is, for me, the most obvious, because the level of oppression, the level of marginalization, the level of discrimination can compromise one's ability to trust humanity. And so when you are breathing for survival, when you are carrying the burden of the world, when you are challenged, not because of the content or the character, but because of your color, right? Wholly and exclusively, without regard of other considerations. The relationship you have with God is really where we get our peace, where we get our centering, where we get our wholeness and confirmation. Now, religious leaders have an important role in our lives. And what we've seen and what we know to be true, whether we're looking at the civil rights movement or whether we're looking at other movements in history, in American history, that have included and involved African American expression, it is our religious leaders that we do trust, and that we do appreciate and follow their guidance in ways that have helped evolve the experience, both from a legislative and legal perspective, but also from just a general equality perspective, to the next plane. But if I had to make a decision, and I have to, as I am a woman of faith, between putting my trust in God and putting my trust in man, again, it's kind of a no-brainer. But it is not to suggest that there's not a trust that we have in our leaders. But our leaders have particular responsibilities, but our relationship is with God.
As a white pastor, I just appreciate the kind of historical testimony of the Black church, because, at least from my perspective, what I see, at least it seems so prevalent perhaps in white Christian America, is there's so much of this kind of like leader kind of following of these big personas who become big. Secondly, there doesn't seem to be, at least again from my perspective, enough kind of a social oomph, the social mission that you talked about in the Black church historically. Like, there is a personal faith, but I imagine we can agree on this. Like, the personal faith needs to be lived out in public, right? Which is historically what the Black church has done. So that testimony, I think, is such a powerful testimony and an example to especially white church in America.
Yeah, my father would say to me, and I saw it for myself, that justice is love in action, right?
Yeah, I
And
remember
so
that.
I think that encompasses what the Black church has been for Black people. It is showing the love by progressing the mission, the mandatory mission of equity and justice.
So I talked to you a little bit about this before we start recording. That one of the topics of conversation that I often have with guests who are not white is this idea that often in America, white churches often come to churches of color with like a teacher mentality, like we have all the answers around how to do church, what church should look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious, what do you think would be some important lessons predominantly white churches could learn from Black churches?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I know the lessons are many because of the experiences that have required the Black church to look beyond the masses and see the individual, see the human stories, see the human plight and expression. And one of the many things that I think the Black church does well is that it is relationship centered, right? It is to know, and this is not to suggest that I have a full grasp and understanding of the white church, because I do not.
Sure.
But what I know of the Black church is that it is important to know the people who are being served, whether it is the individuals inside of the church from the perspective of membership, or those in the periphery who are in the community who are also experiencing the presence of the church in that community. And so the fact that the Black church takes on this important mission of serving, going beyond the walls to really provide services, to provide opportunities, to provide voices to those who are often marginalized and voiceless, is just one of the things that I think from a human perspective and a human dynamic is always something to learn from, to be able to see the visibility, the humanity of the individual. But I think additionally, the Black church has done a really important job around the uplifting of our young people, again, not suggesting that the white church isn't doing that, because I don't know, but I do know that is always such an important aspect when you are in the light of a human being. And so let me give you an example of what I mean. So as a little girl, I was very shy and pretty quiet. But as the PK in the church, there were opportunities that were made available to me. And one of those opportunities was welcoming the visitors, which was really the job of the young people in the church. Adults did it, but this was our moment to shine in the church. And just, I remember so vividly, Lauren, being able to go into the pulpit and having the mic be pulled down to meet me where I was with my height. I'm not tall to begin with, but I was really short when I was 8, 9 years old. And having the awesome responsibility to be able to welcome the visitors of the church. What that did for me as a little girl continues to inform me in my present womanness. And that is the ability to be comfortable and to be confident, to stand before an audience and to stand before others and speak in a way that brings connection and invites a welcoming spirit. You know, I to this day, I charge that as the reason why I do the public speaking that I do today. It's because of that first opportunity that was given to me as a very little girl and continued to support my development as I grew up into an adult.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that. Let me ask you one more question here before we take a break. Many churches across the country, as we're recording this, are still trying to figure out how to get people back. Perhaps many churches, denominations are in decline. I'm curious, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing Black churches today, or what do you hope perhaps is maybe responses to those challenges or opportunities for them going forward?
When I think about the Black church, I understand clearly that they come in all shapes and sizes, from the small storefront.
Yeah.
That was really a part of how we began our expression, particularly in the northern areas, informed by the Great Migration. And so those intimate spaces, where there might only be 2 or 3 or 4 families in the entire church, to the mega churches that have thousands upon thousands of members. I think that regardless of the size or the shape, the challenges remain the same. And that is, how do you stay relevant to millennials and Gen Xers and the generations that are continuing to come forth and know of the church? How do you stay relevant?
Yeah.
And then in that relevance, how does that look from a 21st century perspective? So the challenges around communication and communication style, inclusion, and how young people have a different understanding perspective around people's humanity.
Yeah.
Right. It's certainly around shaping programming that matters to the community and to the audiences that they are serving. Right. So in essence, you can't do things in a 20th century way.
Yeah.
When you're in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And the ability or the inability to evolve, to have that capacity to progress forward in that way will determine, in my opinion, the success or the failure ultimately of that individual church institution, that individual church institution.
Yeah.
I think the Black church overall will always have an important presence. It's going to shape and it's going to morph.
Yeah.
As everything is, but its presence, in my opinion, is pretty solid.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. Again, the book is 100 Questions and Answers About the Black Church, the Social and Spiritual Movement of a People. Freda, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Freda Sampson. Freda, really appreciate the conversation, really appreciate your insights and sharing with me and our audience here. Some closing questions. Again, I'll tell everyone you can take these as seriously or not as you'd like to, but if you're Pope for a day, what does that day look like? What would you want to do? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, let me imagine being Pope for the day. I love that question. Honestly, I think it's pretty simple. I would have women be priests. I would be a part of that moment in history where women could be ordained as priests in the Catholic faith.
That's a big day. It's a big day.
That's a big day, right? I'm all about it.
A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life?
That might be the easiest question you've asked me so far, Lauren. It would absolutely be my father.
Oh, lovely.
He was, and if you give me just a moment of grace, his name was Reverend Dr. Frederick George Sampson II. And he was both my pastor, my father, and he was also my friend. And in my opinion, one of the most historical figures that has walked the face of this earth to this day. And so I would absolutely, and I know that there are many who would echo my sentiments, would love to have, and he transitioned in 2001, but would have loved to have had him in these moments of such turmoil that we have experienced in this last many years, up to and inclusive. How in the world do you support and sustain your faith through a pandemic?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm glad that was an easy question for you.
It was an easy question.
What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
If history's paying attention, I think that what will be remembered is the profound conflict and tension. I think that history will hopefully see that the grappling around how we are able to be whole and live our best human experience continues to be something that we struggle with, that we have to navigate through. And at the same time, how we have found a way, despite division, despite misunderstanding or misunderstandings are understatement, but despite racism, despite sexism, homophobia, patriarchy, the list can go on and on and on and on. Despite those things, we human beings have found a way to still be resilient. And what are the lessons that we can that history will teach the future generations about how we behave today? I hope that it will be a truthful history. I hope it won't be a revisionist history. And I hope that the history will be inclusive of more than one voice.
Yeah, that's good. What do you hope for the future of Christianity?
Dr. Frank Thomas, who is a professor at a seminary in Indiana, Christian Theological Seminary, talks about radical ministry, right? And so when I think about how he frames what it means to be radical, which is to be committed to the point where it is not a norm, but it is really elevating the ability to be the best of what you are in that regard. What I hope for with Christianity is that we find a way to be radically inclusive.
Well, thank you so much again for this conversation, for your time, and for your perspectives. Share, if you would, how people can connect with you if they'd like, and perhaps about the book, where they can find the book.
Absolutely. So you can get the book on Amazon. I'm pretty certain of it. It is published by Front Edge Publishing, and you can also probably find it at Michigan State University in terms of perhaps their bookstores, but you can go on Amazon and get it. I can be reached through my website, which is fredagsampson.com.
Well, again, thank you so much. I always leave folks with a word of peace. May God's peace be with you.
Thank you, and with you as well.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.